Gold coins clinked against rusted iron, masking a deeper, unspoken betrayal. Beneath the blistering sun of 1883 Idaho, a silent hired gun protected a widow's fortune with his life, utterly blind to the truth. Her treasure wasn't buried in a lockbox, it was the very man sworn to guard it. Whispers wrapped around Caleb Reed like a worn duster, long before Alina Cooper ever stepped foot into the smoky, cedar-planked lobby of the Idaho Hotel in Silver City. Patrons spoke of the former Pinkerton operative in hushed, reverent tones, recounting the brutal efficiency with which he had dismantled the notorious Clayton outfit near the Snake River. Caleb was a man carved from the harsh geography of the territory, unyielding, quiet, and profoundly dangerous. He sat in the corner of the room nursing a glass of rye whiskey, his slate-grey eyes scanning every shadow, every patron, every twitch of a hand toward a holster. He trusted nothing but the cold, heavy certainty of his Colt single-action army revolver. Alina approached his table with a desperate, quiet dignity. She wore a tailored morning dress, the dark fabric heavy with the alkaline dirt of the trail, and carried a leather satchel that seemed to weigh her down more than her grief. Her late husband, Elias Cooper, had been a prominent assayer who had made a fatal miscalculation going into business with James Caldwell. Caldwell was a ruthless land baron and mining magnate operating out of Boise, a man whose ambition was measured by the unmarked graves he left in his wake. Upon Elias's sudden and highly suspicious death, Alina had liquidated every tangible asset she could quietly secure, packing it into a reinforced iron strongbox. "Mr. Reed," Alina began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her gloved hands. "I am told you are the most capable gun in the territory. I need safe passage through the Owyhee Mountains to a homestead in the high valleys, and I need you to guard a lockbox. I am willing to pay you $500 half now, half upon arrival." Caleb did not immediately reply. He assessed her with a clinical detachment, noting the exhaustion bracketing her mouth and the frantic, hunted look in her eyes. "Caldwell's men?" he finally asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that barely carried over the din of the saloon. "They have been tracking me since Caldwell realized Elias left the deed and the capital to me," Alina confirmed, refusing to look away from his piercing gaze. "They care only for the gold in the box. If they get it, Caldwell owns the valley. If they find me, I am dead. I don't care about territorial politics, Mrs. Cooper," Caleb replied, leaning forward slightly. "I care about the parameters of the job. You do exactly as I say, you ride when I say ride, and you keep your head down when the shooting starts. My contract is with the cargo and your safe delivery." "Nothing more." "Understood," she whispered. By dawn they were riding out of Silver City. The air was crisp, carrying the sharp scent of juniper and wild sage. Caleb led the way on a massive row-end gelding, leading a sturdy pack mule that bore the immense weight of Alina's iron strongbox, lashed securely beneath a tarp. Alina rode behind him on a bay mare, watching the broad, rigid set of his shoulders. The first 3 days, the silence between them was an almost physical presence. Caleb was a ghost in the wilderness. He moved with a supernatural quietness, anticipating the shifts in the weather, finding hidden springs off the main trails and meticulously erasing their tracks where the ground softened. He treated the iron strongbox with a reverence that bordered on obsession. Every evening he would unlash it from the mule, his muscles straining against the immense weight, and place it directly beside his bedroll. He slept with one hand resting on its rusted lid. Alina watched him from across the flickering campfires, a strange, profound sorrow building in her chest. Caleb believed he was guarding a widow's greed for the heavy remnants of a life built on gold and commerce. He believed she was risking her life and his for wealth. What Caleb did not know, and what Alina could not bring herself to confess, was that the box was largely a decoy. While there were several bags of double eagles inside, the sheer, crushing weight of the strongbox was mostly comprised of heavy iron ingots and blacksmithing tools. She had allowed the rumor of the Cooper gold to spread, to keep Caldwell's men focused on the box rather than on murdering her quietly in her sleep. But more deeply, the fortune was her excuse to secure Caleb Reed. Alina had spent her entire marriage as a pawn in Elias's high-stakes games of power. She had never known safety. She had never known peace. When she learned of her grandmother's abandoned homestead, a forgotten, fertile plot of land hidden deep in a remote, unnamed valley, she knew it was her only chance at salvation. She didn't want wealth. She just desperately wanted a home. And she had needed an unshakable wall between her and James Caldwell to get there. Caleb was that wall. You look at that box like it's a holy relic, mister. Reed, Alina remarked one evening, the firelight casting dancing shadows across her face. Caleb paused from running an oiled rag over the mechanism of his Winchester 1873 repeater. He glanced at the iron chest. It's my reputation, Mrs. Cooper. In my line of work, a man is only as good as the cargo he delivers. The Pinkerton agency taught me that much. You lose the freight, you lose your life's worth. And what of the people you guard? She asked softly, wrapping a woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders against the biting wind. People are complicated, Caleb said, his jaw tightening. People lie. Gold doesn't. Alina swallowed the lump forming in her throat. She looked away, staring into the dying embers. Sometimes, Mr. Reed, people lie because it is the only way they can survive. Caleb didn't respond, but his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than usual before he tipped his hat down and leaned back against his saddle to sleep. He was entirely unaware that the woman sitting across from him was slowly, irreversibly falling in love with the silent, dutiful protector who valued her fictional gold more than his own life. The rugged expanse of the Owyhee Mountains offered no quarter. By their 5th day on the trail, the terrain had devolved into a treacherous labyrinth of steep basalt canyons and narrow, winding switchbacks. The temperature swung violently from blistering heat at noon to freezing cold at midnight. Caleb's vigilance intensified. He read the landscape like a tragic novel, spotting crushed sagebrush or disturbed gravel that told him Caldwell's men were closing the distance. It happened in a geographical choke point known locally as Sinker Creek Gorge. The afternoon sun was perfectly angled to blind anyone traveling west. Caleb had insisted they dismount and walk the animals through the narrowest section of the pass, his hand hovering inches from the grip of his Colt. The silence of the gorge was unnatural. Even the cicadas had gone completely still. The sharp crack of a sharp's rifle shattered the afternoon quiet. A bullet struck the stone mere inches from Alina's head, showering her hat with granite shards. Before she could even scream, Caleb was moving. He lunged backward, grabbing the collar of her heavy riding coat, and dragged her violently behind a massive boulder, just as a second shot tore through the space she had occupied a fraction of a second before. "Stay down," Caleb roared, his usually calm demeanor replaced by an explosive, terrifying intensity. From the ridges above, 3 men emerged from the brush, firing down into the gorge. They were Caldwell's hired regulators, desperate and heavily armed. The pack mule panicked, rearing up and kicking wildly as a bullet grazed its flank. The mule bolted down the gorge, the heavy iron strongbox shifting dangerously against the ropes. "The box," Alina cried out, more out of fear for the animal than the supposed treasure. But Caleb misinterpreted her cry. Believing she was panicked over her fortune, he swore under his breath and broke cover. He sprinted in a zigzag pattern across the open gorge, levering his Winchester with blinding speed. He fired from the hip, the rifle roaring as he laid down, suppressing fire. One of the regulators on the left ridge tumbled backward, a crimson stain blossoming across his canvas duster. "Get back here!" Alina screamed, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard it physically ached. She didn't care about the box. If Caleb died protecting rocks and iron, she would never forgive herself. Caleb ignored her, vaulting over a fallen ponderosa pine to reach the threshing mule. He grabbed the halter, his massive frame straining to bring the terrified animal under control. As he wrestled the mule down behind the cover of the tree, the lead regulator took careful aim. A shot echoed through the canyon and Caleb jerked violently, dropping to one knee. Alina gasped, pressing her hands over her mouth. Despite the impact, Caleb didn't fall. He gritted his teeth, hoisted his rifle with his uninjured arm, and returned fire with deadly precision. 2 more shots echoed, followed by the heavy, sickening thud of bodies hitting the rocky earth. Silence rushed back into the gorge, thick and ringing. Caleb remained kneeling behind the log for a long moment. Finally, he stood, swaying slightly, and secured the mule's lead rope. He walked slowly back to the boulder where Alina was hiding, his face pale and tight. His left hand was clamped over his right bicep, dark liquid seeping through the fingers of his leather glove. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice strained but perfectly level. Alina scrambled out from behind the rock, her eyes fixed in horror on his arm. "You're shot, Caleb. You're bleeding." It was the first time she had used his Christian name, and the intimacy of it hung in the air between them. "It went clean through the meat of the arm," Caleb grunted, waving off her panic as he checked the perimeter one last time. "Didn't hit the bone. I've had worse from a barroom scuffle in Deadwood. The cargo is secure. Caldwell's men didn't get your fortune, Mrs. Cooper." Alina felt a hot flash of anger cut through her terror. "Damn the cargo," she snapped, surprising both of them with her ferocity. "You ran out into the open. You could have been killed over a piece of iron." Caleb looked at her, genuinely perplexed. "That box is the only reason I'm here. It's your entire future. My future means nothing if the people protecting me are dead." She fired back, her chest heaving. She marched over to her saddlebags, pulling out clean bandages and a bottle of strong whiskey she kept for medicinal purposes. "Sit down, now. Or so help me, I will leave you and the gold right here for the buzzards." Stunned by the sudden fire in the supposedly frail widow, Caleb silently complied, sitting heavily on a flat rock. He unbuttoned his coat and shirt, revealing a torso scarred by years of violent, unforgiving work. Alina knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she poured the alcohol over the wound. Caleb didn't make a sound, though the muscles in his jaw corded tightly. As she meticulously bound his arm with clean linen, the distance between them evaporated. She could feel the steady, powerful rhythm of his breathing, the heat radiating from his skin. Caleb looked down at her, studying the dirt smudged across her cheek and the fierce concentration in her eyes. "You're a strange woman, Alina," he murmured, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Most folks would be checking the locks on their gold right now. You're patching up a hired gun. You are not just a gun," she replied softly, tying off the bandage and letting her hands linger against his warm skin for a second longer than necessary. "You saved my life. That was the job," he deflected, looking away. The vulnerability of the moment made him deeply uncomfortable. He was a man who understood transactions, not tenderness. "Was it?" she challenged, stepping back. "You guard that box because you think it holds my survival. But you don't even know me, Caleb. I know that James Caldwell won't stop," Caleb said, his professional mask sliding back into place as he stood and grabbed his coat. "These 3 were just the scouting party. Caldwell will send more. We need to push through the night. The homestead is still 50 miles out." Alina looked at the heavy iron box strapped to the mule. Guilt gnawed at her stomach like a starving animal. He had taken a bullet for a lie. The deeper they rode into the mountains, the more she realized that the deception protecting her from Caldwell might be the very thing that destroyed the only man she had ever truly cared for. But to tell Caleb the truth now, to admit that she had manipulated his sense of duty over a box of rocks, might drive him away entirely. And out here in the cold, unforgiving dark of the Idaho Territory, losing Caleb Reed was a fate far worse than death. Rain battered the brim of Caleb's hat as they descended into the emerald embrace of the hidden valley. Tucked away like a forgotten secret within the jagged teeth of the Owyhee Mountains, the homestead finally revealed itself through the thinning mist. It was a modest, weathered cabin constructed of thick pine logs, surrounded by acres of untamed, fertile land. To Caleb, it was a tactical nightmare, isolated with too many blind spots from the surrounding tree line. To Alina, it was paradise. It was the only place on earth where the terrifying shadow of James Caldwell could not easily reach. Fever had begun to radiate from Caleb's wounded arm by the time they secured the animals in the dilapidated barn. His movements, usually fluid and calculated, had grown stiff and labored. Still, he refused to rest until the massive iron strongbox was hauled inside the cabin and placed securely by the hearth. Only then did he collapse into a wooden rocking chair, his face drawn and slick with cold sweat. Alina moved frantically, igniting a fire in the stone hearth and boiling water to clean his wound again. She watched him shivering, his hand still resting instinctively near the handle at his coat. The guilt inside her swelled until it threatened to crush her lungs. He was destroying himself for a heavy chest of worthless scrap metal. "You need to rest, Caleb," she urged, wringing out a hot cloth and pressing it against his forehead. "We are safe here. No one knows about this valley." "Caldwell knows you vanished," Caleb rasped, his eyes remaining fixed on the lone window facing the trail. "And men like him employ trackers who can follow a ghost across bare rock. U.S. Mine Tuck. Marshal Fred Dubois has been trying to nail Caldwell for years on corruption charges, but Caldwell's wealth keeps him insulated. As long as you have that gold, you are a target. We fortify this position at dawn." Alina pulled her hand back, her heart sinking. She looked at the iron box, its rusted surface mocking her. She had to tell him. She opened her mouth, the confession trembling on her lips, but a sudden, unnatural snap of a twig outside the cabin froze the words in her throat. Caleb's eyes snapped open, the feverish haze instantly replaced by lethal clarity. He surged to his feet, ignoring the agony in his arm, and extinguished the solitary oil lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness. "Get against the far wall," he ordered in a harsh whisper. Outside, the heavy thud of boots crushing wet grass echoed through the clearing. Torchlight suddenly flared to life, illuminating the cracks in the cabin's wooden shutters. Alina peered through a knot in the pine wall, her breath catching in her throat. There were at least a dozen men surrounding the homestead. At the center of the mob sat James Caldwell on a towering black stallion. Caldwell was a man of expensive tastes and ruthless habits, dressed in a tailored wool suit that looked absurdly out of place in the wilderness. Beside him stood Gideon Pike, Caldwell's chief enforcer, holding a torch and a Henry repeating rifle. "Mrs. Cooper." Caldwell's voice boomed across the clearing, dripping with false sympathy. "I must confess you led us on quite a chase, but you cannot run from your late husband's debts. Send out the strongbox, and I will allow you and your hired gun to walk away. Keep it, and we will burn this cabin to the ground with both of you inside." Inside, Caleb levered around into his Winchester. He looked at Alina, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the dying hearth. "You have a choice to make, Alina. Your fortune or your life." Tears streamed freely down Alina's face. "Caleb, I never cared about the fortune." "Then let them have it," Caleb said, his voice surprisingly gentle. He stepped toward the iron box, hooking his boots under the heavy latch. No amount of gold is worth dying in a burning cabin. And opening the door, I'll kick the box out to them. When they swarm it, we slip out the back window into the tree line. No, Alina lunged forward, grabbing his arm. Caleb, don't. You don't understand. Ignoring her pleas, assuming she was paralyzed by the thought of losing her wealth, Caleb drew his revolver and aimed it at the heavy brass padlock securing the strongbox. He fired a single shot. The deafening crack echoed off the cabin walls, shattering the lock into jagged pieces. With a swift kick, Caleb threw the heavy iron lid open to reveal the treasure he had bled for, the fortune he had risked his life to protect. He froze. There were no stacked gold bars. There were no glittering double eagles. Inside the velvet-lined interior sat a massive anvil, several heavy iron blacksmithing tongs, bags of river stones, and a few meager pouches containing just enough silver coins to pay Caleb's fee. The silence inside the cavern was thicker than the gunpowder smoke. Caleb slowly turned his head to look at Alina. The betrayal in his slate-grey eyes was more devastating to her than any bullet. "Iron," Caleb whispered, his voice dangerously hollow. "I took a bullet for an anvil." "Caleb, please," Alina sobbed, sinking to her knees. "If I told you I had no money, you never would have taken the job. Caldwell was going to kill me. I didn't want wealth. I just wanted to reach this homestead. I just wanted a home. I had to make him think I took his capital so he would follow the box, not me." "Ow. You used my code against me," Caleb said, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and profound hurt. "You let me treat that box like a holy relic while you watched me bleed for it." "I am so sorry," she wept, burying her face in her hands. "I had no one else. I was terrified." Outside, Gideon Pike shouted, "Time's up, Reed. We're lighting the roof." Caleb stood paralyzed between the open box of rocks and the weeping woman on the floor. For a decade he had operated on a strict moral absolute. The contract was everything. The cargo was sacred. He had been lied to, manipulated, and made a fool of by a desperate widow. By all rights, he should walk out the back door, surrender the heavy box of rocks to Caldwell, and leave Alina to her fate. But as he looked down at her, seeing the raw vulnerability and terror in her trembling shoulders, something within his hardened chest fundamentally shifted. He realized that the anger he felt wasn't because he had been cheated out of guarding gold. He was angry because she hadn't trusted him enough to ask for his protection simply because she needed it. He didn't care about the gold. He cared about her. "Get up," Caleb commanded, his voice suddenly losing its hollow edge, replaced by the grim, unyielding tone of a man going to war. Alina looked up, her eyes wide and wet. "What?" "I said get up," Caleb repeated, grabbing one of the heavy iron blacksmith tongs from the strongbox. "If they want what's in this box, we are going to give it to them." A Molotov cocktail crashed against the front door, instantly igniting the dry wood. The orange glow of the flames cast wild, dancing shadows across Caleb's face as he kicked over the heavy oak dining table, creating a barricade. "Load my spare revolvers," Caleb ordered, tossing his saddlebags to Alina. "When I start firing, you keep the weapons loaded and pass them to me. Do not stop moving." Alina nodded frantically, wiping her tears and pulling the heavy Colt Navy revolvers from his bags. Caleb kicked open the burning front door. The sudden draft fed the flames, but it also gave him a clear line of sight. He didn't use his rifle. Instead, utilizing his immense strength, he hurled one of the heavy iron ingots from the strongbox directly into the chest of the nearest regulator. The man went down with a sickening crunch, his torch tumbling into the wet grass. Before Caldwell's men could process the medieval assault, Caleb drew his Winchester and unleashed a barrage of rapid fire. He moved with terrifying precision, the lever action of his rifle, a blur of mechanical fury. 2 more of Caldwell's men fell from their saddles. "Fire! Return fire!" Caldwell shrieked, struggling to control his panicked stallion. Bullets tore through the cabin, splintering the log walls and shattering the remaining glass. Alina stayed low behind the overturned table, her hands mechanically loading cartridges into the empty cylinders of Caleb's revolvers, her fear completely eclipsed by the awe of watching Caleb defend her not for money, but for her life. Gideon Pike dismounted and flanked the cabin, preparing to shoot through the side window. Caleb anticipated the movement. He snatched a loaded revolver from Alina's outstretched hand, spun on his heel, and fired twice through the wooden wall where he knew Pike would be standing. A heavy thud outside confirmed his terrifying accuracy. Seeing his enforcer fall and his men scattering in terror under Caleb's relentless assault, James Caldwell's bravado evaporated. The ruthless land baron yanked his horse's reins, abandoning his surviving men, and spurred the animal toward the tree line. Caleb stepped out onto the burning porch, raised his rifle, and took aim at Caldwell's retreating back. He held his breath, his finger resting on the trigger. But then he slowly lowered the weapon. Let him run to Marshal Dubois, Caleb thought. A coward running from a ghost was no longer a threat. The remaining regulators surrendered, dropping their weapons and fleeing into the rainy night. The clearing fell eerily silent, save for the crackling of the dying flames on the porch, which the heavy rain was already beginning to extinguish. Caleb leaned against the doorframe, exhausted, bleeding, and entirely out of ammunition. He dropped the empty rifle to the floorboards. Alina slowly stood up from behind the barricade. She walked over to him, her hands covered in gunpowder residue, her morning dress torn and ruined. She looked out at the defeated posse, then down at the open strongbox, its rusted iron contents spilling across the floor. "You stayed," she whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. "Even after you knew." Caleb turned to look at her. The cold, detached Pinkerton agent was gone, replaced by a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. "I told you, Mrs. Cooper, I don't care about territorial politics, and apparently I don't care much for gold either." He reached out with his uninjured arm, his calloused fingers gently brushing a smudge of soot from her cheek. "You hired me to safely deliver your future. The contract isn't fulfilled until this place is a home." Alina closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, the crushing weight of the last month finally lifting from her shoulders. "It can't be a home if you leave, Caleb." A rare, genuine smile touched the corners of Caleb's mouth. He looked around the damaged but standing cabin, at the fertile valley stretching out before them, and finally back at the woman who had tricked him into finding his own salvation. "Then I suppose," Caleb murmured, pulling her gently into his chest, "I'll just have to stay and guard the iron." Thank you for watching this thrilling journey of survival, deception, and unexpected love in the untamed Wild West. If Caleb and Alina's fight for a true home captured your heart, please hit that like button, share this video with fellow Western drama fans, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life inspired stories. Drop a comment below and tell us what you would do in Alina's shoes today.